Throughout the 20th century, the Grand Trunk Western was a household name to many Michiganders. Sporting fast trains, well-maintained track, and two iconic logos, this is the story of the Good Track Road. The GTW had its origins as the Grand Trunk Railway Company of Canada, chartered in 1852. It ran internationally from Montreal, Quebec to Portland, Maine, and all the way west through Toronto to Sarnia, Ontario. This provided access to vital ports and expanding urban centers. GTR opened up a fast-growing trade network in the British colony and was a major factor in the rise of Canadian nationalism. The railway now dreamed of a connection to the fast-growing railroad city of Chicago, Illinois to make some fat stacks. Meanwhile, in 1859, the Chicago, Detroit, and Canada Grand Trunk Junction Railroad, rolls right off the tongue, I know, was completed to link Detroit, Michigan with Port Huron. GTR took this opportunity to lease the line and established a connection with a railcar ferry service over the St. Clair River between Sarnia and Port Huron. Only problem was, the GTR used the provincial track gauge of 5 feet 6 inches, while the CDC GTR used the American standard of 4 feet 8.5 inches, so wheel sets had to be swapped out. Interestingly, a young Thomas Edison made a name for himself in the 1860s as a candy and newspaper butcher on the Port Huron to Detroit line. During layovers, he'd tinker with his chemical lab in the baggage car, until he accidentally started a fire. Once it was extinguished, a conductor picked Edison up by his ear, throwing him and his chemicals off the train at the Smiths Creek Depot. Edison later recounted this experience as one reason why he lost much of his hearing. Anyway, the GTR recovered from nearly going bankrupt and became the largest railway in the world at 1,277 miles in 1867. It capitalized on an ocean port in Portland, a river port in Rivière-du-Loup, trackage in 3 New England states, and their Michigan connection. Next up on the Grand Trunk's agenda was a direct route to Chicago, which at the time was stitched together by running trains over the Chicago and Lake Huron, Chicago and Northeastern, and Lake Shore and Michigan Southern. New York Central's William Henry Vanderbilt sought to block the GT's path to the Windy City out of financial greed. So, he bought the Chicago and Northeastern line, thus splitting the GT's route, and proceeded to charge them high rates to run trains on the Vanderbilt-owned line. GT was at the mercy of Vanderbilt because any other route was impractical or also under control of the New York Central. Through a series of intense bidding wars, the Grand Trunk eventually cornered the Central, who caved in and sold their Chicago and Northeastern line to the GT. They finally reached Chicago in February 1880, and the railway was an immediate success, with the Port Huron to Chicago line incorporated as the Chicago and Grand Trunk Railway. People and freight could now be directly moved between the Windy City and far eastern Canadian ports. Grand Trunk's presence in Michigan and Ontario grew further with the acquisition of several railroads around the turn of the 20th century. Things were looking up, but there was still one problem eating away at their pocketbook. By this point, Canada's railways had mostly switched over to standard gauge, but the St. Clair River ferries proved to be a costly and time-consuming operation. Only 10 to 12 cars could be moved at a time, leaving huge lines of freight waiting for their chance to cross the river. A bridge was impractical given the high volumes of boat traffic, so an underwater rail tunnel was the answer. 2 tunneling shields bored through the earth and met in the middle. It was an engineering marvel for the time, becoming the first tunnel of its kind in North America. Freight traffic first steamed through in 1891, with passenger trains following suit the next year, arriving at new Tudor and Gothic Revival-style stations either side of the border. Trains were shuttled under the river by the St. Clair Tunnel Company. Ferry service was discontinued soon thereafter, but it continued over the Detroit River to Windsor. In 1900, the Grand Trunk Railway's New Year's resolution was to simplify things. They brought all of their Michigan, Illinois, and Indiana operations under the subsidiary Grand Trunk Western Railway Company, derived from the fact these lines were part of the GTR's Western Division. Further expansions were made throughout Michigan and Ohio, and major junctions and hubs opened up in Battle Creek, Chicago, Detroit, Durand, Port Huron, and Pontiac. New services in the form of the Premier International Limited began between Chicago and Montreal, and a Lake Michigan car ferry from Muskegon to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. By 1919, however, trouble was brewing on the horizon as GTW's parent company, the Grand Trunk Railway of Canada, was struggling financially thanks to the mismanagement and defaulting on construction loans related to the Grand Trunk Pacific. Parliament stepped in and created the Canadian National Railway to take over the Canadian operations, while the Grand Trunk Western became a subsidiary of CNR. From there on out, GTW would share a corporate identity with its parent and survive the Great Depression thanks to their finances. World War II further solidified the GTW as a critical link in moving high-value manufactured goods, keeping Detroit's auto industry supplied with parts and transporting finished cars, and moving Michigan's fertile crops to markets far and wide. New streamlined U4B locomotives headline cracked trains like the Maple Leaf between Chicago and Toronto, easily hitting 80 to 90 miles per hour along the way. Durand became a hotbed of activity. Over 100 trains a day passed through the junction, with numerous mixed, local, commuter, and express trains exchanging passengers and coaches making transfers to the Ann Arbor Railroad and all points north, east, south, and west. But the GTW was a multi-purpose road. Just as you could find large northern and mountain types hustling fast passenger and freight trains, you could find quaint Pacific and consolidation types roaming through fields and quiet small towns, chock full of local businesses to serve. Come the 1950s and 60s, big changes were coming for the GTW. Diesel locomotives were proving to be far cheaper and cleaner to operate compared to steam. While GTW had slowly introduced a fleet of EMD and Alco-built diesel switchers, F-units, and Jeeps, they retired steam power fairly late in 1961, with U3B number 6323 being the last one to go. Meanwhile, parent company Canadian National was undergoing a major rebranding effort to modernize their appearance and revitalize public interest in trains. A sharp red, white, and black paint scheme and a new logo was the result, and CN subsidiaries would adopt their own variations. The past wasn't fully forgotten though, as K4A number 5629 ran several fan trips from 1961 to 69 under the ownership of Richard Jensen, until it was unceremoniously scrapped in 87 after a ton of legal and financial troubles. This is a topic that deserves a video on its own. Moving back to the late 60s, the ever-expanding American highway network and airlines were drawing passengers away from the aging and cash-strapped railroads. GTW and CN attempted to combat this with discounted red, white, and blue fares during off-peak days, which was popular, but not popular enough. The failing inner-city passenger train industry was handed off to Amtrak in May 1971, who initially only continued GTW's Detroit to Chicago services. Commuter service remained under private ownership. Despite being freed from the money-losing shackles of inner-city passenger trains, Grand Trunk Western was still losing money. This was due to Michigan's fluctuating auto industry, reliance on short-haul freight, and a limited range of customers resulting from their smaller track mileage compared to most Class 1 railroads. But CN finally had a solution. Their American properties were grouped under the Grand Trunk Corporation, so profits made from all three railroads could be shared and cut the losses of the GTW. This new sense of autonomy inspired the GTW to adopt a new red, white, and blue paint scheme, which was first applied to their new second-generation diesels. In 1974, John H. Burdekin was appointed company president, and he set out to strengthen the Grand Trunk and its profits. First, they handed off money-losing commuter operations to the Southeastern Michigan Transportation Authority. Secondly, in an effort to instill confidence in prospective shippers, they adopted the slogan, "The Good Track Road." This was at a time when many railroads struggled to find money for track repairs, while the GTW prided itself on well-maintained infrastructure and increased safety practices, the latter of which they won many awards for. Burdekin's next move included acquiring the Detroit, Toledo, and Ironton in 1980, and in the process gained access to GP40-2s, a hump yard in Flat Rock, Ford's River Rouge Complex, and rail interchanges in Ohio. That still wasn't enough. They wanted more. GTW bid to grab up the Milwaukee Road to extend further into the Midwest, but lost out to the Sioux Line. More changes in the late 1970s and 80s included consolidating and reducing crew bases, discontinuing the Lake Michigan and Detroit River car ferries, buying the Detroit and Toledo Shoreline Railroad, initiating a rebuild program for the GP9s, and abandoning or selling off branch lines to shortline railroads. The final change came from Big Brother CN. In an effort to simplify operations, December 1991 saw the railway consolidate all of its American lines under the new CN North America brand, and slowly but surely, the image of the Grand Trunk Western and its cousins would homogenize. CN would then spearhead such efforts as the downsizing or closure of major GTW facilities and the opening of a new St. Clair River tunnel in 1995. Ferry service had been reinstated in 1971 given modern railcars could barely or outright not fit in the old tunnel, so the new one was built to accommodate auto racks and double-stack intermodal trains. Ferry service was discontinued that same year. From a corporate standpoint, Grand Trunk Corporation still exists as a holding company, and Grand Trunk Western is a company on paper for tax purposes as far as I can tell. If someone can explain it better, let me know in the comments. While the familiar red, white, and blue diesels have mostly gone, there's still a good few roaming the rails on CN today. Let's also not forget there's still plenty of the iconic blue railcars hustling freight across the country. If you know where to look, you can still find other remnants of the good track road lying around in plain sight, whether it be signs, bridges, stations, or the many pieces of memorabilia, rolling stock, and locomotives that were lucky enough to be preserved. Most notable of this group is U3B number 6325, which ran an excursion service on the Ohio Central Railroad from 2001 to 2005. It's currently displayed at the Age of Steam Roundhouse in Sugar Creek. CN still operates much of the original Grand Trunk Western network today. Of course, times have changed since then. Trains are far longer, yards have been gutted, historic structures have faded into the history books, and the original Grand Trunk main line from the 1850s, excluding the Mount Clemens subdivision, has seen better days, with only a small portion left in service by Lake State Railway. Nonetheless, it would be hard for one to forget about the Grand Trunk Western, thanks to its everlasting presence in the modern day. CN has commemorated its legacy with Heritage Unit number 8952. It's remembered by those who put in countless hours on the job come rain, snow, or shine, and by those who ensure that history is never forgotten, granting it a good track road to the future. Thank you to my channel members. Special thanks to Mooter, Tommy Rosini, Grand Canyon Studios, Amtrak Fan 19, The Winnipeg Rail Fan, Jacko Beans, Jackboy317, Trains Rail Fan Gaming 1066, and Kits for subscribing to the Conductor tier. Your extra support always means and helps me out a lot. Thank you so much for watching, and in case you weren't aware, this is a remake of a video I did all the way back in 2016. I was 14 when I made that, I'm 23 now for reference, but it has definitely aged. You're more than welcome to go back and watch it, it's not going anywhere because I still kind of look back on it for nostalgic reasons. But yeah, you can really see how my voice work and editing has changed over the years. Anyway, I'll see you in another video.